The second coming of Jesus Christ is the most longed for, the most looked for event in history. Man has always looked for someone who can bring utopia to the planet. Think of a world without war, without disease, without death. All of that will be realized when Jesus Christ comes back to this earth. Gary Stimmer is here to discuss with me Revealing Revelation.
And Revealing Revelation is a progressive event that I think begins to accelerate as we draw closer and closer to the time of Christ's second coming. J.R., we have been in Revelation 19, represented by the letter Kuf in the Hebrew alphabet, the 19th letter. And that letter stands for holiness. That's the second coming of Christ. And it stands for cycles of growth. And of course, a great historical cycle will have been completed when Jesus returns to earth and sets up the kingdom. Which brings us then to the end of chapter 19. Holiness demands the destruction of the wicked. And we have in Revelation 19:19, "And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered to make war against him that sat on the horse and against his army." And there, J.R., is one of the signal events in world history. Of course, this is future history.
Now, what is amazing to me is that everyone in the world by that time will have been so thoroughly brainwashed against all that is good and all that is godly. They will have reprobate minds. They will have believed the lie. So that when Jesus does come back in power and great glory with the armies of heaven with him, everybody's going to think he's the enemy. And they're going to gather their armies against him. What makes them think they could win such a war?
Well, J.R., that question brings to light another element, another dimension of this whole problem of evil and wickedness. Revelation 19:20 says, "And the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him, with which he deceived them that had received the mark of the beast, and them that worshipped his image. These both were cast alive into a lake of fire burning with brimstone." Now, here we have a little key, I think, because the beast and the false prophet were able to work miracles, meaning that they had made some sort of a direct agreement, covenant with the devil, with satanic forces, with occultism, if you will. The kind of thing that wizards and sorcerers have dreamed of for centuries will fall into the hands of the beast and the false prophet. And they'll actually believe, I think along with the leaders of the world, that their power exceeds that of Jesus himself.
In other words, mankind on the earth at that time will actually interact with demonic beings?
I think so. And in fact, I think we see the beginnings of it right now. I think we're seeing wickedness, demonism in high places that's actually insinuating itself into the military, into high government bureaucracies. And I'm talking not just about occultism, but about attempting to scale the dimensional wall, that veil that has traditionally existed between this physical world and that nether world on the other side. And by the way, according to Deuteronomy 18, it's illegal to pass into that world. It's strictly forbidden. And yet I think men today are trying to do it, and Satan is going to give them what they want.
So that they will have some kind of technology, supernatural technology available to them. They think they're going to be able to defeat the armies of heaven.
Yes.
Boy, are they in for a real shocker. Because Jesus will have none of it. He will come and quickly dispense with the armies of the world. He'll call the birds of the heavens to come and eat the flesh of kings and captains and mighty men and horses, and of them that sit on them, and the flesh of all men, both free and bond, small and great. What a feast that's going to be. Can you imagine all those birds from the world in the Middle East?
It's amazing to think about it, but Jesus says it, and I believe it. It's going to be a time of dark work. In fact, the great and terrible day of the Lord is referred to as God's strange work, God's strange act, a day of gloominess and thick darkness. It's called the great and terrible day of the Lord. And it will not be a picnic, friends. It's going to be the kind of judgment that you'd probably rather not see.
Well, blood will run to the horses' bridles. And in chapter 20, an angel comes down from heaven, having the key to the bottomless pit, a great chain in his hand. He lays hold on the dragon, that's the devil, and Satan, bounds him for 1,000 years. Well, you know, you'd think it'd be permanent, Gary, but there's something still in the works.
Something still in the works, and that brings us to chapter 20, the binding of Satan for 1,000 years. And by the way, JR, now we are in a different alphabetic category. Coming into chapter 20, the 20th chapter represented by the 20th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which is Resh. And Resh is the initial letter of the Hebrew word Rasha, which means wickedness. And so this letter stands for wickedness and the wicked. And it's exactly what we find. All of chapter 20 deals with the binding of Satan, his being tormented forever, the great white throne judgment, and on it goes with the disposition of the wicked.
So it is important to understand the meanings of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, because John used that, or the Holy Spirit had John to use that, in laying out the book of the Revelation. Each chapter follows the meaning of a Hebrew letter, which means it's important for Christians, Gentile Christians, to understand the Hebrew language, at least the elementary part of it. And here in chapter 20, it's interesting that the term 1,000 years is used 6 times. Gary, I think John has a clue by using the term 1,000 years 6 times.
And this has been pointed out many times, of course, initially or primarily, 6 is the number of man. Man was created on the 6th day. The idea of mankind is stamped with the imprimatur of the number 6. Here, 6,000 years would represent man's day. The Lord's day is the 7th millennium. But it's kind of fascinating that we have the serpent, the devil, Satan, bound for 1,000 years, and then right after that we have 5 other references to the 1,000 years. Put those all together, you get 6,000 years, which of course is something we talk about all the time.
You know, we go back to chapter 1 of Revelation. He says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. We go back to the writings of Moses to find out that the 6 days of creation and the 7th day wherein God rested, to the rabbis, were thought to be representative of 7,000 years. 6,000 years of men's day. The 7th millennium will be the great Sabbath rest, when the Messiah will set up a utopia for 1,000 years. Well, here it is, right in the book of the Revelation. We're right on target. The interesting thing, Gary, is we are now concluding the history of the world. 6,000 years has come and gone, and we're about to see the introduction of the 7th millennium.
And that millennium is marked by the reign of Christ and his saints. In very interesting and mysterious ways, the Lord is going to reign for 1,000 years. Now, another word for 1,000 years is a millennium. We are called premillennial because we believe that we live in a time prior to the millennium when Christ will rule. And that's very clearly mentioned here.
You know, the very last verse of the book of Revelation says, he which testifieth these things say, surely I come quickly. Now, Gary, 2,000 years ago wasn't quickly.
That's right.
But it appears as if the book of Revelation is written to this generation at the end of 6,000 years. To us, it's clear he's coming quickly.
And more specifically, the book of Revelation will be devoured by those who are living during the time of the tribulation. That is, the 144,000 who are sealed, for example, will need to read Revelation to discover what they are to do and what comes next. And so that 1,000 years is very important.
The next 1,000 years is going to be the most incredible period of development of the human race that we have ever seen. You know, if Jesus could feed 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fishes, we don't have anything to worry about when Jesus comes. It's going to be an incredible world. Technology is just beginning. What lies ahead is mind-blowing. We'll talk about it when we return in just a moment. During the tribulation period, it is possible that mankind will be tempted with illegal things, such as interacting with beings from another dimension, which we would call demons, which they may call aliens. At least this is the story on science fiction. We see that nightly on the television and in movies. Is it possible that such a thing will come to fruition during the tribulation period? And when Jesus returns to set up a kingdom, he'll put a stop to all that because it is illegal for mankind? Illegal to this extent. In the days before Noah, the sons of God, these alien beings, saw the daughters of men and interacted with them, took wives of the sons of men, and mankind was tempted to, shall we say, become gods. Is this, and during the millennium, if this is all stopped, when Satan is loosed at the end of the millennium, Gary, could this be the temptation of mankind at that time?
J.R., I think so, because in the millennium, man will still be basically a sinner. That is, his nature will still be warped. The only thing that will be different is that Jesus will be physically present. He'll rule with a rod of iron, rule the nations with a rod of iron, meaning in an authoritarian fashion.
Law.
Yeah, under law. And so there will always be the possibility of introducing temptation in that setting. The temptation to accrue large sums of money, temptations of lust, temptations of power, all the things that we have, plus occultism, the idea of scaling dark spiritual heights where man is forbidden to enter in order to receive some sort of mystical power or connection with power. And all of that's going to be present during the millennial reign of Christ. It'll be the last great proof, I think, that humanity is unfit to rule itself. And taken together with other proofs down through history, it will demonstrate once and for all to the angels and all the beings of heaven that what is needed is not simply a beneficent ruler, but an actual change of the heart and of the mind and of the soul before man is fit to be a co-regent with God.
These verses remind me, Gary, that the gospel will not be crammed down anybody's throat. Never has been. We've never coerced people into being saved, nor will the Lord during the 1,000-year reign make people become Christians. So at the end of that time, anyone who has not willingly received him as Savior and had their sins forgiven, when that 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. That's a lot of people, Gary.
A lot of people, and here we have an international event. We're not talking here about a Gog and Magog, such as in Ezekiel 38, which is directed at the Holy Land. This Gog and Magog is international. It's global. And its energy is focused against Jerusalem from the whole globe.
Will he be by himself, or will he have demonic beings with him?
I think it goes without saying that his hordes will be released once again to tempt the people of the earth. There's very little written about this in Revelation. 3 verses. The 4th verse, verse 10, says, "And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever." In other words, he gets one last shot and then back to the lake of fire, and this time he doesn't get out again.
It's forever and ever.
Forever and ever.
Then comes the great white throne judgment. In fact, the few verses of all the Bible that has terrified men, and rightly so. Any man who is not a Christian, who rejects Christ as Savior, needs to read these verses. I think that it would do something for every person to understand. And so I saw a great white throne, John writes, "And him that sat on it, from whose face the earth and heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them, no place to hide from the judgment of God." He says, "I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books according to their works. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it. Death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them. And they were judged every man according to their works. And death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. And whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire." Gary, let's talk about the books and the people who are judged here.
Well, J.R., to begin with, this metaphor of the books, and to me it's not a metaphor, there are actually real books of life. And you'd better be inscribed in the book of life. But believe me, you don't want to have your name rubbed out. But this comes back to what we've been talking about now all through the book of Revelation, that Revelation is a Rosh Hashanah event. That is, it's described by the actions of the 10 days of awe and Yom Kippur. For example, during the month of Elul, which immediately precedes Rosh Hashanah, Jewish people greet each other with this greeting, Lashana Tova Tik Tevu, which means, may you be inscribed for a good year in the book of life. Or they may say, Lashana Tova U Me Tik Tevu, may you be described for a good and a sweet year. Or they may simply say, Ketiva Tova, may you have a good inscription in the book of life. This is the month preceding Rosh Hashanah. Now, when the trumpet sounds, Tishri the 1st, Rosh Hashanah, there's no more talk about that book of life. Suddenly, to use an old expression, it's Judgment Day. And the days of awe fall, and not until later at Yom Kippur do we discuss the books of life. And here in Revelation, that's exactly what we find.
According to the rabbis, according to rabbinical teaching, some future Rosh Hashanah, God will sit down upon his throne and will take the books. They say there are 3 books. There's the book of life, in which the righteous are inscribed. There's the book of death, in which the wicked are inscribed. And then there is a book of those who are neither completely wicked or completely righteous. But let's talk about the other 2 first. The book of life and the book of death. These verses say the books, plural.
Yes, they do.
So there is more than one book. And there are a great number of people who are not written in the book of life, then they must evidently be written in the other book.
I would think so.
That appears to be the connotation here, though it doesn't come right out and say it. The fascinating part about all of this is they whose names are not written in the book of life, who are evidently written in the book of death, are judged out of the things written in that book, because the book of death records all their works. See, in the book of life, Gary, we may have our works recorded in it, we're not told here, but we're in the book of life not because of works, but because of grace.
That's
but
right.
Those people who are in the book of death, they've got all their evil works, not their good works. They don't face their good works here. Even their good works are bad. Their righteousness is filthy rags.
Yeah.
And so we've got men judged according to their works, and then the finality of it all, they're cast into the lake of fire.
And that is Rosh Hashanah, judgment, and the destruction of the wicked. J.R., as we make this broadcast, within just the last month or so, scientists have completed what they call the Book of Life, the Human Genome Project, in which